Okay, this is the next topic, and it's once again related to Pizzagate, adrenochrome, human slavery, human trafficking, drug smuggling, um, mm, um, all kinds of stuff like that. And the general topic we're going to talk about is Project Paperclip. This hat is about JB, which today is Jim Beam, the famous whiskey. Why? Well, I was reading today about the famous British traitor, Kim Philby. Kim Philby went to school at Cambridge, a very prestigious university in the United Kingdom. And he was part of a group of 5 people who were selling secrets to the Russians, secrets that belong to the United Kingdom. And these ones, well, Philby was actually part of the spy apparatus for the United Kingdom. And, well, at some point, this group was suspected to exist. They didn't know because Philby was very high up in intelligence, and he was a double agent. These Cambridge people, Cambridge University people, um, well, they didn't like fascism. Fascism is a economic theory where corporations dictate governmental policy, and corporate will decides what's good for the people. These students didn't like that idea, and so they went with a different political philosophy, that of Karl Marx, known as communism. And so they looked around to see what was communist, and Russia was communist. That's who they were thinking romantically, that's what we really need. Now, Russia was actually a dictatorship. Was it communist in name, but it wasn't a communist system, it was a dictatorship. And in this dictatorship, it was pretty much the same as a fascist dictatorship, in that there's a small elite that runs everything and enjoys all the champagne and caviar, and then there's an enormous population of people who are basically the same. They slave for their overlords. And that's the way that Soviet communism was. Everyone got a crappy apartment in a concrete apartment building, and they were told by the government what job they had to do. They had to line up in order to buy bread because there was never enough goods. In our fascist state, well, that's where we live. We can go into Walmart and there's quite a bit of stuff there for you to buy, more than what you would have under the communist system. But what's happening more and more is a dumbing down of the population, because all of us don't really remember past decades when the people were making a lot more money. Now we have more and more people who are falling out of the middle class and into the poverty line area. People who can no longer afford to buy a home, even a small one. People who perhaps can only afford a really old used car. So more and more we're falling into this state of Soviet Russia. Why did these particular students fall in love with the communist system. Um, it sounded good, you know, slogans of, people should be equal. And, it was a lot of brainwashing because this is the romance of it all. Well, that's what we're going to fix our country, which had the royalty and the aristocrats, people who went around and, you had to say, this is Lord so and so. That's what they had to do. If you're an aristocrat and you were a common person, this person's name was Lord so and so. And then you'd go to church on Sunday, and then you had Jesus, and Jesus is Christ the Lord. So these aristocrats were putting themselves in the same category as the religious leader, Jesus. There was Jesus the Lord, and then there was all these aristocrats, the lords. And in Britain they had the House of Lords, which was a branch of Parliament. So it was basically a lot of aristocrats who were saying, I'm God to you. And they owned everything, and everyone had to work for them. So that's the story of the Cambridge Five. There's some movies, quite a few movies have been based upon these um, Cambridge students and their lives. And it's just the tip of the iceberg because more and more we're finding out that the people who have been on television as celebrities in the United Kingdom were not who they say they were. And the prime ministers were not who they say they were. In other words, a lot of these people who were friends with the top dogs in the United Kingdom, not only were they selling out the country to the Soviet Union or Communist Russia, they were the ones involved with, well, let's just go with Prince Andrew. Have you forgotten about the Jeffrey Epstein, Lolita Island? Prince Andrew's friend was Jeffrey Epstein. This is the kind of people that the prime ministers of the United Kingdom are associated with. Does it make them guilty by association? There's a lot of stories. A lot of stories. Are they true? Well, Kim Philby eventually left the United Kingdom because he got the feeling that there was too much suspicion about him. So he left and he defected to Soviet Russia. He lived in Moscow. They gave him one of these shitty apartments in a concrete block building. And the story is that the Russians never trusted him because he was a double agent, and I guess they figured that if he was going to turn traitor on the United Kingdom, he was going to turn traitor on the Soviet Russia. So they gave him a menial position, and Kim Philby spent his days alone drinking. Jim Beam, very strong alcohol. I don't think Philby would have been drinking it. Russian vodka was dirt cheap, and I don't think they paid him very much, a salary, so that's what he drank, Russian vodka. That was his reward for being a traitor. Changing gears, this is Stewie from Family Guy. What do we know about Stewie? He is kind of prissy. Have you noticed? Stewie is kind of prissy. Well, what are prissy people known for? Hmm. He sounds like a fag. And the group of students at Cambridge University, English boarding schools, English universities. The French called it the English disease. There were a lot of queer liaisons that were going on. There's an old movie from 1984 called Another Country that was based upon these Cambridge spies when they first were getting into spying, when they were still at Cambridge University. Another Country. I don't know if you can find it in 84. How are you going to find a movie that old? Well, there's clips on YouTube, but the full movie is maybe if you've got one of those, got one of those guys, that know how to get things like these illegal set-top boxes that let you get into movies that are supposed to be, you're supposed to pay for them. Maybe you got one of those guys. I haven't looked, but quite often these movies, these old movies, you can rent them through sometimes YouTube, sometimes Google. You can rent these old movies. Is it worth watching this movie? If you're into that kind of thing. But there's a whole pile more, movies that were based upon these Kim Philby and the other Cambridge Five. The author, Frederick Forsyth, wrote a number of thrillers. And you can go and look up Frederick Forsyth on Wikipedia and get the names of these novels, and quite a number of them were made into movies. If you're into that kind of thing. If you're not into, these historical dramas about spies and queers and Jim Beam, you might like to learn about motorcycles. And then you could watch an old movie, another one you could probably rent on Google or YouTube, called The Wild Bunch. Is that the right one? I think that was motorcycle one. The next one is Easy Rider. Why motorcycle movies? What's it got to do with spies and queers? Motorcycles? It's called homoerotic, which means they're not acting gay, but you see them always together, drinking together, riding motorcycles together, hanging out together all the time. Kind of makes you think, well, modern day, they don't call it homoerotic anymore. They call it bromance. And it's a slippery slope from bromance to the down low culture. Have you heard of being on the down low? That's when people are taking it beyond bromance, but they're keeping it really quiet in the closet. In the old days, they so called them closet cases. Are we done? Are we done? We always say, are we done, when we're just disgusted with the way that this video has gone. Poor Stewie. Prissy little bastard. I don't have a hat that says Justin Bieber Fever on it. I'm Liam Gallagher from Oasis. We were Britpop in the 1990s. We're a bit long in tooth these days. We're getting grey in our beards. We're thinking about doing a concert at London Wembley, but after quarantine and COVID, I don't think they're going to let us.